Clay, when I eventually go insane and just start making absolutely bonkers top 5 Star Trek videos on the YouTube channel, I think that this one, False Prophets, is clearly going to win number 1 on my most tittiest Star Trek episodes, I think, because I was enamored with the breasts in this episode, which are sublime in a lot of ways. I think a lot of silicone and silicone parts are made for toys, as Sir Mix-a-Lot would say to you. But I was mostly thinking, it's funny when a breast is covered, right? Like we're so used to seeing the
Go on.
We're so used to seeing the top of it, like the top of the breast with the cleavage. But when you shift it up a little bit and you can see the underboob underneath it, it's like it feels like it's a whole new world in like sexy apparel for some reason.
Yes, it's much more.
It's winter
intriguing.
down south when it's summer up top, or whatever the hemisphere equation would be there.
Yeah, for a planet that didn't have much in the way of technology, they clearly had good plastic surgeons.
Yeah, they've mastered the breast implants, which is really where all capital should be spent.
This, I assume, is the episode that drew Rick Berman to the franchise.
He's been pitching this one. He's been pitching a tent and this episode for years.
Brandon, are they all like this? This is, if I'm being honest, it's the first episode I've ever watched. But if they're all like this, sign me up.
It's good stuff. This is False Prophets. It's the 5th
Under
episode.
boob and lobe massages. Is this what all that Star Trek is?
This is what he's got papers full of ratings and charts and bar graphs. He's waving them around. This is episode 5.
This is the most watched episode of Star Trek ever by me, and that has to count for something.
Episode 5 of season 3 came out on the 2nd of October 1996. It is 2 of 2 in the Arador and Cole arc. Teleplay goes to Joe Menosky. Story credit goes to George Brozak. True Brozak. Directed by Cliff Bowl. In universe date 50074.3, which is 2373. In False Prophets, Voyager discovers a pair of Ferengi who control the economy of a primitive world. Nearby is an unstable wormhole that leads back home. We covered this one on Patreon just a couple days ago. It came out. If you're listening to this episode as it comes out, we released the Patreon episode a couple days ago where we revisited The Price, which is the sort of prequel to this, or the episode that leads to the stuff that happens here from TNG. So you can go to patreon.com/the Pensky file and look for it there. And if you're much in the future listening to this, it came out in February of 2023, if you're trying to figure out where it is in the Patreon timeline. So, I'm glad we rewatched The Price, Clay. Are you?
Yes. Yeah. What's actually funny about that is when I started watching this episode, I was watching it with my girlfriend, and when they started saying the stuff about the wormhole and whatnot, she said to me, "Didn't you just watch this episode?" And it took me a minute to remember that she was talking, because she also watched the Price with me. But when she first said that, my response was, no, Voyager kind of does this a lot. There's always like a wormhole or some shit that they got to deal with. But then I realized, oh, no, you mean the other thing. She's like, yes, this is connected. It's sort of a sequel to that.
Yeah. They drop you little tidbits or whatever. They're like, it's a wormhole that seems to be jumping around just to remind you of everything that's happened. I was glad we watched the TNG episode. It's always nice to go back and do those revisits and stuff like that. But I don't know if maybe it's good to start here, I suppose, before we get into the episode proper. But we talked a little bit in the Patreon episode, which we won't rehash too much here, about just the tone of TNG is easy to settle into and sink back into. And this episode actually got me thinking much more about the tone of TNG, which I think is it's maybe not a tone that covers even most of Star Trek series at this point. But I think the TOS had a little bit of it, and TNG sort of smoothed down the edges to a point where it was like this polished little sphere of tone that they had. And I think the reason that TNG sticks out as pinnacle Star Trek is because the tone is an end result of the show taking itself very seriously, even as it is absurd in itself.
Right.
And I feel like all the treks after TNG have stopped taking themselves seriously. in the way that TNG took itself seriously. And
well, I think you could argue Deep Space Nine takes itself pretty seriously for the most part.
It does, and the tone is different there. So this isn't a perfect analogy, but I think
Sure.
I think it's that even when they had Ferengi episodes in something like TNG, right? The Ferengi felt like they acted within the bounds of what that show was for what they were supposed to do. They were like stupid characters, but there were no swashbuckling sword fight comedy routines in TNG. They were like Ferengi have swords and are slapping around at each other.
Yeah, I mean Ferengi, no, but I mean Barclay did that a couple times. But I know what you mean. Generally, yes.
Within the context of a fake world in TNG,
right,
he would do that. But I think that I've been trying to think about how to like describe it, and it's really hard to do. But I think that the reason why TNG holds up well, I think, is because much like how Patrick Stewart saved the role by taking everything very serious, like playing things seriously, even when it's a stupid Star Trek idea. Mm-hmm. The tone of TNG just keeps things. I don't know how to describe it. It makes it feel more unique than any of the shows that came after it. Really, like there's something about it that's kind of special in how it told stories, how its characters talked to each other, how the characters played off of each other, and these sort of like almost soap opera-ish quality to how everyone interacts in TNG with each other. Mm-hmm. And when you lose it, you start veering into this like Voyager Enterprise territory where it feels much more like just a generic genre TV show that happens to be set in the Star Trek universe. Like it doesn't feel like there's anything unique or different about it than any other 90s sci-fi show. It has that same kind of energy to it. Does that make sense?
Yes. Definitely when you get to Enterprise, I think it has that energy very much. Like I always kind of equated, I think we probably talked about this at the time, I always equated Enterprise with the same kind of vibe as like Stargate.
Yeah.
Or something, another one of the
UPN show or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ferengi specifically, it's interesting because, you never really see the Ferengi played like this in TNG, but you do see them played like this in Deep Space Nine. And so this very much feels like a Deep Space Nine Ferengi episode. For better or worse, unfortunately. But yeah, it is so fascinating how the tone of TNG is so unique and integral to the success of the show.
Well, I'd say that even no, you go ahead. You can finish.
No. I was just going to say that the simple thing of having an actor like Patrick Stewart, say these lines believably, like, and I don't mean that to take away from like what William Shatner was doing or anybody else was doing, but like coming off of William Shatner, Picard's delivery is so much more natural and like realistic than Kirk's delivery is generally. And so even though he's saying equally as absurd stuff, he does treat it seriously. Like he's actually having an important diplomatic conversation about, the rules of acquisition or some shit.
Yeah. This wormhole.
Yeah. And it really does affect I think it is powerful enough that it extends out to everybody else in the show, even if nobody else is quite on the same level as he is. It does sort of like, Riker can only be so big because the top end is kind of Picard, and if you go past that, it feels weird.
Yes.
And the same thing with like Data, where Data can only get so big, or it is a very it's very a considered tone. There's a lot of consideration put into the tone of that show that I don't think necessarily translates to. I still think Deep Space Nine, it's not the same. Like the tone of Deep Space Nine is definitely not the same, but I do find that tone considered a bit more than Voyager.
Yeah, I would agree, and I can't remember if we talked about it in the Patreon or if we talked about it in some other episode, so I won't go too much into it. But I think that DS9 has a very different tone, but I think the thing that distinguished it, like you were sort of comparing and contrasting Kirk with Picard, I think that at least the common binding that TOS, TNG, and DS9 have is that they don't all have the exact same tone, but they are all stylized within their own show to a certain degree. Like there's a TOS has the sort of 60s genre TV thing going for it, where I feel like the characters in TOS, the excesses of TOS come from the sort of like, we have to have like an action-y show that people can watch. And so it got a little bit big and it got a little bit like fist fighty and stuff like that. But the characters themselves were fairly consistent in how they talked to each other all the time. And it was like, it felt like it was in that universe. TNG is like a white collar office version of that. Like they settled it down and they all talk like professionals all the time. And as you were saying, Stewart's performance kind of infected the rest of the cast. But I also think the writing was different in TNG than it was in the later shows. DS9 got a little bit more personal and loosey-goosey, but I still felt like they were all consistent with each other. And at least like the Starfleet characters in that show felt a little bit Starfleety to me when you contrast them to the Bajoran characters and stuff like that. But
yeah, and I think the other shows, the problem is coming off of TNG. If you look back at Star Trek, you have three very unique eras before you get into the franchise bloat of the later 90s, where you've got the TOS era, which is very specific and has its own look and feel. Then you've got the movies that after the first one, they figured that shit out, and now those all are very unified and have their own style that's different from TOS, even though it's the same characters.
Right.
And then when you get to TNG, you're not just riffing on that other stuff. They created their entirely separate style and approach.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, after TNG, everything was just cribbing off of TNG. Yeah. And so that's when you start to get this stuff start to fold in on itself, because nobody is, I mean, again, Deep Space Nine is the only one that really well, I guess you could argue Enterprise tries to do it, but it's too far gone at that point. But like Deep Space Nine does a pretty good job in later seasons of separating itself, but there is still a lot of, the base is TNG instead of the base being its own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. It's DS9's a little bit of an like an interesting evolution off of TNG in that way. But we always kind of make fun of Roddenberry and stuff because he had some terrible fucking scripts and he had some terrible ideas. But I do think Roddenberry deserves a lot of respect for going different with each iteration of the thing that he did. Like TNG feel like his choices of how to handle TNG spawning off of TOS and everything feels kind of courageous at this point, where so much now of the franchise is just being self-referential and talking about other things that have happened. To come up and be like, I want the characters to act this way. I don't want to reference Vulcans. I don't want to see any of the previous characters and stuff. It's like respectable to do that. And if he was at least somewhat responsible for the tone of TNG, I think it was like a really interesting decision that he made to play things that way. And it's made the show have lasting power.
Even the movies, too. I mean, he was involved with the movies.
Yeah.
And you very easily could have had that first Star Trek movie have everybody back on the same ship wearing the same colors and shit. But he was like, no. What if instead of all these colors, it's a lot of grays and drab off-whites and beiges?
Just eggshell white everywhere as far as the eye can see.
And Spock doesn't talk to anybody.
Some ideas were good. As I said, some ideas were bad. I think it extends even to the writing. It's not just a performance thing. Like the Janeway scene here where Janeway has to justify going against the Prime Directive, and her argument is that, well, we hosted the conference, right? Like, it's not the show isn't really taking itself seriously here. And I know this is a Ferengi episode, and it's supposed to be a comedy, but it's not funny because it's a Ferengi episode. I feel that kind of stuff reminds me of the ending of Dreadnought, where they're like, Starfleet's got some weird shit in it, Ensign. Get used to it. And then the credits roll. It's so self-referential and winking at itself that it doesn't feel like it has respect for itself in the way that TNG does.
That scene in and of itself, though, I actually liked, because I found the way that the new interesting Prime Directive discussion to be fascinating to me, where it was like, it was it's not, it doesn't play into any like major thing in the episode, but the idea that, well, the Ferengi don't abide by the Prime Directive, so what they're doing is not breaking any rules, but we do. So technically we can't go down there and stop them because they're still, pre-warp or whatever. Yeah. And then to have her come up with this asinine back door where it's like, well, technically this is our fault, so I guess we can. It's like, okay, sure. Like I always enjoy when they kind of have to backflip over the Prime Directive to make their story make sense.
I feel it undermines it. So I like it's the problem is.
Oh, I mean, the Prime Directive is there to be undermined.
It is, but the harder you push on it, the stupider it seems in the first place.
Yeah,
it's TNG did skirt towards that sort of stupidity with the Prime Directive, but the characters in TNG, like just dealing with the Prime Directive, the characters actually seem to feel that the Prime Directive was important in that show, right? And I think the Prime Directive is a fairly stupid rule. And I think that this Voyager episode does a good job of explaining why it's kind of stupid, which is that like you could watch some other empire conquer a planet and you're not supposed to do anything about it because they don't abide by the rules that you do. Yeah. It strikes me as very odd, but the more that they have to backflip over it, you just go, why are they even still talking about this fucking thing? Because it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't seem to stop any behavior on their part.
Well, the whole thing with this episode, too, is like, this is one where I really hate the modern internet media criticism that comes down to basically someone saying, well, why didn't they do X? Because, I mean, I just don't, I hate that because it's not, it doesn't really criticizing the choice of a character in something as being the wrong choice or not the easy choice or the stupid choice isn't valid criticism to me as far as I'm concerned. That being said, this episode is one where when I got to the end of it, I was like, man, Janeway looks like a fucking asshole at the end of this because she's so like charmed about out Ferengiing the Ferengi, and it cost them a ride home
when the ship is pathetically chasing after the wormhole trying to get it.
Like almost honestly, I was thinking at the end when the shuttlecraft left and was going back towards the planet, the thing I was thinking is, if I was Janeway, how quickly do I tell Paris or whoever's in charge of the guns to just blow them up?
Yeah, that's the answer. Is you shoot them and you go through the wormhole, right?
Right, and then you got to be like, listen, I did what I did. I'm sorry. We're home now.
Yeah, and we prevented that planet from being abused by the Ferengi anymore.
And this isn't ethically right, but they were assholes anyway. So whatever.
The last act of this episode sucks. It's terrible.
It's bad. Yeah,
it's awful. Not even just for that reason, but it's like, it's like everything that happens in the final act is a contrivance to get where they need to go, and none of it makes any sense when it's all put together. Like the fact that they do not have a plan in place for, we should always be moving towards the wormhole no matter what happens. Like shit, at the end of it, shit's gone bad, and it's only towards the end when everything is fucked that Janeway's like, Paris, set a course for the wormhole. It's like, what? Right. Why haven't you been going at this thing the entire time? Who cares about those Ferengi? Like, there's just I don't know. Again, I just don't think that the show takes itself entirely seriously in that regard. And it really struck me in this episode is like, it is a comedy, but it all feels like it's ill-considered on some level, that they're just doing this because this is how a Voyager episode is going to go. And it's like, consequences be damned, or anything interesting about what the consequences are. We're not going to actually talk about any of this or do anything with it. We just got to end this episode the way that it has to end.
Yeah, and the thing with invoking the Prime Directive and being like, well, the Prime Directive says we can't go down there. If they had followed the Prime Directive, they would have been home.
Right.
So it's like that final scene. Honestly, the final shot is pretty good because Janeway has this look on her face that kind of says, "Oh, I fucked up."
Get ready for the mutiny. Is that look on her face? Yeah.
But like, getting to that point, I was like, this is everything that they did at the end there was very contrived. Where it's like,
you Ferengi better not go to the shuttle bay where we're storing your shuttlecraft. Don't go down there, Ferengi.
And then we can't transport them out because they've started a graviton pulse.
Which shuts
and then
the
they
wormhole.
they go into the wormhole, and the graviton pulse causes the wormhole to like get erratic and just disappear on both ends. Like, how the fuck how do they know it disappears on the other end?
Yep. And the one
also,
security
where do those
guard,
guys end up? They end up in like the Sigma quadrant or something.
I just imagine they got home just because that's like it's the ultimate depressing ending to this whole thing that the episode doesn't even dwell on, which is that the Ferengi got home after all this was said and done.
Yeah, like if they don't, like, because he said the other end of the wormhole is now moving as well. If that means that the Ferengi don't get home, then that's even worse.
Yes.
Than if Janeway had just either A, left them alone, or B, blown them up.
Yes.
Because now those guys are definitely dead, probably.
or just on another planet doing the same thing.
And now there's a power vacuum on the planet that they took the Ferengi off of, and who knows how that's going to go once they run out of money in the temple to hand back to the people.
I mean, the best part of the episode is when it starts to go bad and they're going to burn them alive. And I was like, this episode is actually going to turn into a 2 for me, and then they did not get burned alive.
I will say, I did think that Neelix was a very good Ferengi.
How long did he have to study? How much study time was he given before he was given that performance?
I don't know, because I mean, like, that's all shit that he's never seen a Ferengi before.
No,
but I thought the actor did really well. I thought he was a good Ferengi.
Yeah, this is his. It'll be he was a Ferengi 3 times. Ethan Phillips.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah, he was one in Enterprise and one in DS9.
Oh,
or
okay.
TNG,
well,
maybe TNG.
The other thing that I spent the entire episode thinking about while I was trying to stop my eyes from rolling into my head while watching this is where I knew the guy with the eye patch from.
Yep.
And then finally, with about 10 minutes left, I realized, that's the guy who runs the hotel in Ghostbusters.
Oh, okay.
The first place that they go on their first mission to get Slimer. That's the guy that they deal with.
He was pretty good. He was a decent actor for the thing they had to do here. Yeah, I didn't like this episode at all. I don't like the Ferengi. Memory Alpha is funny to me because all the production quotes are like, well, everyone knows everyone loves the Ferengi, so we thought we had to get one in. It's like, who the hell are you talking to?
You know who loves the Ferengi? The rest
Your
of the
dentist.
cast.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
My dentist, yes. The rest of the cast loves the Ferengi because it means they get a week off, basically.
Yeah.
Also, I knew we were in trouble when in the first scene where they get beamed up out of the temple there, and the way that the guy reacts is to just like start lounging around on shit and playing King.
You mean their assistant person?
Yeah, their assistant. I was like, you think that these two are gods who have just disappeared, dematerialized in front of you? How are you not like screaming and speaking in tongues and dropping to your knees and praying to them? Or you know what I mean? Like it's.
Well, how does he know that they are? Yeah, my question about it was he is very relaxed, but he doesn't know that they aren't choosing to leave and are going to come back. You know what I mean? Like
right? Yeah,
yeah. That's the thing.
Yeah, so it's like there is kind of an interesting element to this setup because it's basically the man who would be king only with Ferengi.
Yeah. I like the idea. It's like a lot of Voyager.
It's a fun idea.
It's a decent idea. And if the Ferengi weren't so stupid, I think you could actually have a really interesting episode about it. Like, I think that the way to make the Ferengi interesting is not to have them just be this like unsubtle, absurd. It's not capitalist, but they're like mobster characters, basically. But the real focus on them should be that, in contrast to the Federation, the Ferengi are all about like self-aggrandizing and like their selfish interests, basically. Like they act only for themselves as opposed to the ideals of the Federation, which is that like everyone works together as a team and stuff like that. That's really the difference between the Ferengi and the humans. And every Ferengi episode suffers because it just comes down to these clowns going like, I want more money. I want more money. Give me more money. And like the core of them is more interesting than that, but you're stuck in this position where they just are goofballs and they're not funny, and you get stuck watching them for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that the episode was going to just have everybody just keep showing up as Ferengi.
Yes.
And just making it more and more complicated.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It was not great.
I've been thinking about it a lot, but maybe I guess I'm just curious what you think about the tone difference here between these shows. Like, am I missing something by just saying that it's the show not taking itself seriously? It just feels, I don't know a better way to describe it, really, which is that it feels like everyone involved in Voyager does not embrace the concept in the same way that TNG and TOS tended to. Yeah. And I think the show suffers because of it. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing we've talked about forever, which is like this show has a very specific concept that they more or less ignore.
Yeah.
And so they take their concept and they push the concept aside for the sake of fairly generic, for the most, I hate to say generic, but like as far as Star Trek goes, fairly generic Star Trek episodes that are just sort of like familiar. And they're not. It's so strange to me that they took. It's kind of not. Well, no, I guess it is very different. I was going to say it's kind of similar to Discovery, where Discovery set itself up as like something really different, but then played so much on the stuff that came before that it kind of didn't really matter.
Yeah.
But this one more so feels like they set up with a really interesting concept, but what they end up giving you is just Star Trek you can put on while you're folding laundry and recognize it peripherally as Star Trek.
Yeah, Star Trek. Because it's almost, it's deep. I want to just be clear that it's like, to me, it feels it's deeper than just the performance in the way that the show looks and the way that the actors act and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because it's like what they seem to be doing in the series at this point is that they're doing what you're saying, which is that they abandon their concept and they come up with a sort of like, it's either referential or it's a retread of something that's come before it, which is hard to avoid because there's been so much Star Trek. But like everything will feel a little bit too familiar. But there doesn't seem to be the effort in the production and writing side where how do we tweak this even the slightest bit to make this different than what came before it in any way? It just feels like we know how this works. We know how we make Star Trek episodes at this point. So we can kind of take our foot off the gas in terms of creativity that's going into it because the show is now more of an assembly line than anything. And the franchise exists as long as we are able to make these widgets. This franchise will exist. So even in, like we talked about in the Patreon episode, it's not a good episode, but it has something at its core that it's talking about, like there's a Riker story in there. There's a Troy story and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And here the story is how close they come to getting home. And it's not even really all that important at all.
Yeah. Like there should be a lot more pressure put on the fact that they are, 500,000 kilometers away from getting home, It's shocking how, excuse me, how background that is for the sake of this goofiness on the planet that like could not matter less to any of what these characters are doing,
Yeah.
If it was the other way, I think it would work if it was the other way where somehow the Ferengi were stopping them from getting closer to the wormhole or something, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Where it's like they came down to the planet to check something out and then they get impeded by the Ferengi. Then that's different. Then you actually have a story there. But this one, they're going out of their way to mess with the Ferengi just because they don't like what they're doing in this village. And it costs them a trip home. And they should be mad about that.
Yeah. And the solution is you don't even have to kill them. They just shouldn't beam them back down to the planet. Be like, you guys have to come with us now. Sorry, but you've had your playtime.
The first time they beamed them out. Yeah. They should have just said, okay, go to the brig. We'll be home in 20 minutes.
We'll send you back to Ferenginar. And then
what are we going to do? These people think we're gods. Like, well, yeah, they'll figure it out. They're adults.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing about the Prime Directive is like, isn't it wrong to engage in that delusion when you know it's not the case? You know, like there's an argument to be made of like, I know you're not their gods, so like I know that they would be potentially shocked for this not to be the case and for you not to come back, but I have a bigger sense of what's actually going on here. So there's an argument about whether or not you should take them away or whether or not the Federation has the right to impede on it or Prime Directive and stuff. But I think that, just the argument of like, just because these people believe something, you are impotent to be able to change anything that's going on around that by removing the Ferengi from the situation. I wasn't convinced by that argument, and it's just another case of like the Ferengi have to get back to the planet because they can't escape at this point, and the Voyager can't go through the wormhole. So
yeah, when they beamed them up the first time, Janeway, they were like, you can't just take their gods away. What are they going to do? Janeway should have said,
how do you know we're not their gods?
Yeah. Janeway should have said, okay, you guys go to the brig. Chakotay, you're good with spiritual shit. Can you write them a note or something and just beam the note back down? To one of those Poochie notes that says, I have to go, my home planet needs me. And then Poochie died on the way back to his planet.
Put on your genie vest, get down there, and tell them exactly what's going on. Yeah, it was not good. Not impressed. Go to Patreon Thoughts, I guess,
sure.
At this point. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Patreon.com/The Pensky File is where you go to get the Price episode that we just covered and a whole bunch of other stuff. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. You can also leave comments about upcoming episodes and we read them. Here are the first couple. As soon as I can Control F, where the hell did it go? There it is. All right, I'll send this one to you, Clay, first to get our juices flowing here on commentary for False Prophets. This is Kyle Barrett.
Okay, hold on one second. Okay. False Prophets. When I said I was missing Deep Space Nine, this wasn't what I meant. Who thought a sequel to The Price would be worse than the original? And there's so much annoying Ferengi action, it was shocking to remember at the end that this was all about Voyager almost having a way home. For the second episode in a row, Janeway comes across as a hardcore Federation colonist who just has to meddle. And once you pick up on how often characters use the phrase, suffice it to say, it drives you nuts. It drives you insane. It almost got good when it turned into Ken Russell's The Devils with Neelix being burned alive at the stake. If only the episode had ended with Kess masturbating using Neelix's charred femur. 1 Emmy-nominated episode out of 5. Excellent Devils reference.
Yeah, you know, the burning alive thing was almost close to the show saying that this is how things can go bad with the Prime Directive, and they didn't really want to comment on it or anything like that. But I don't know. Thank you, Kyle. Tax Bear says, False Prophets. This series has more Alpha Quadrant stuff than Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is actually set in the Alpha Quadrant. That aside, why do they even do the usual prophet routine with the Ferengi here? Do the natives have anything to offer to them that doesn't come out of a replicator? The Ferengi should have attempted to become the absolute rulers of the planet.
I was thinking that too. I feel like I wasn't really sure why they set things up the way that they did. Because I don't really know what. I don't know. They got a replicator. What do they need their money for? You know, I understand they're Ferengi and they're all about money, but
yes,
I feel like there was a better story in there with those 3 elements, but I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Ferengi drive for profit is so strong that they will recalibrate to whatever new system they're put into and only want to get profit out of it then. Yeah. You know?
Yeah.
It's not even really like it's all confused. It's like not even really profit. They just want money. Like they say they're interested in profit, but they don't build systems or anything. You know, they don't like have revenue where they're counting out their like outgoing expenses and stuff and like we need to maximize this. They just want money. So it's confusing.
I didn't realize that they had such an affinity for ear necklaces.
Yeah.
They should have gone to the Vietnam War. They would have been gods there.
Well, wait till we get to that season 6 episode, Clay.
Oh boy.
This is Jonathan J.K. Morris with False Prophets.
False Prophets. I'm reminded of the Special Forces guy from Predator 2 screaming at the screen as the Predator sneaks up on the team in the meat factory. It's right there. It's right fucking there. Guys, the wormhole is right there. Pretty cool episode in terms of continuity. Terrible in terms of story. 2 out of 5.
Jaron Hatch says, I'm so glad the show went to the trouble of leaving the Alpha Quadrant behind just so they could pull a Ferengi out of their hat when they run out of ideas in the 3rd season. They should have called this one False Stakes, as the whole scenario is incomprehensibly stupid, while the Voyager crew comes across as wildly incompetent. That said, this episode is somehow more memorable than episodes that are technically better, but still manage to be more forgettable. What a confusing show Voyager can be. 2 convenient plot verses wherever they need it out of 5.
This is the kind of episode where if they wanted me to take them seriously, the next episode would be the beginning of an arc where there's a mutiny on the ship.
Yeah, there's a discussion about Janeway's making bad decisions and we need to get home.
Yeah, because it is unforgivable the way that she handles the situation.
It was just the disorganization of the plan at the end. All you have to do is keep driving to the basket there, Janeway. Like, forget everything else. You can try to do other stuff, but get to the wormhole.
Don't get cute. Don't start doing passes behind the back and stuff.
Patrick Seba.
Break to the net.
That's right. It's a 3-on-2. This is Patrick Seba. You can do the poem.
False Prophets. It's season of miracles, season of cheer, until those 3 wise men should deign to appear. Ferengi again, chuck them in the bin. What callback plot would you like checked on this year? I mean, I'm so bad with this rhyming scheme.
I don't think I can do any better.
So, okay. It's season of miracles, season of cheer, until those 3 wise men should deign to appear. Ferengi again, chuck them in the bin. What callback plot would you like checked on this year?
I think he's got too many syllables, I think, in the last line. I think that's the problem.
It's just the AABBA is throwing me off here. But anyway.
Ferengi again, chuck them in the bin. What callback plot would you like again? Something like that, right? I think you need to simplify it. I don't know. I'm not a poetry expert. Sorry, you can finish.
Yeah. 4 guilty pleasure ear jobs out of 5. Merry, likely late Christmas, you filthy animals.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to everybody. We're in February now, but Merry Christmas as you hear this. Aaron Million says, False Prophets, yeesh, what a clunker of an episode. If I want to watch a Ferengi episode, I will put on Little Green Men from DS9. How does Neelix give up his disguise so quickly? And how does Janeway not have Tuvok handle escorting the Ferengi to quarters? Also, how were the 2 security guards, 1 for each Ferengi, taking them out of the transporter room, but then we only see one of them in sickbay after being attacked with no mention of the other? He's dead. He's dead, Jim. 1 holy pilgrim sage out of 5. Well, they gave him a concussion, so he was seriously injured.
They definitely found a lot of Pixar-looking motherfuckers for that planet, huh?
Yes.
Those 2 like skinny guys with the big eyes and the long necks all look like the guy who owned the Dalmatians.
Yeah.
101 Dalmatians.
They found some wonderful facial actors. The next one's short. I'll read it. Malo Pervoso says, False Prophets, 2 out of 5. Changeling is our next comment, which comes to you.
Episodes like this really make you appreciate actors like Shimmerman, Grodnchik, and Eisenberg because the guys playing the Ferengi this episode really grated on my ears, which, as we know, for the humans, it is the equivalent of someone crushing your ballsack. That being said, Ethan Phillips is much better playing Neelix pretending to be a Ferengi than just playing Neelix. But 1 pity point bump for a great title pun. 2 must be some kind of fetish out of 5. You know, it's funny. I was thinking when you were saying the thing about the underboob.
Yep.
I can't remember if it was an SNL skit or something else, but there was this thing where there was a new fashion trend of nutsack cleavage.
Yeah.
So it was the bottom of men's pants were cut open so you could just see the very bottom of their ballsack.
Yep. The men of this planet don't have such fashion statements, unfortunately. This needs to be an episode about that. They have to go down to the planet, but no one feels comfortable wearing the clothing that these people wear. Brendan Neil Howell says, false prophets. Question, what's sillier than Ethan Phillips playing a Ferengi? Answer, Ethan Phillips playing a Talaxian disguised as a Ferengi. Whoever writes these episodes should really know by now that Ferengi comedy is an oxymoron. If I wanted to watch women in veils, I'd watch I Dream of Jeannie. Avoid. 0 frangs out of 5. Good reference to the frangs. I think you're the only person who referenced there what the money is that they call them. I'll read this one too. Justice for Toon Shu says, false prophets. I'm sure a lot of listeners might hate this episode because it involves Neelix the Ferengi and Neelix masquerading as a Ferengi, but the embarrassingly bad Aladdin cosplay from Tom Paris and Chakotay had me laughing until I tore my obliques. Couldn't help noticing that when the Ferengi try to escape in their shuttle thingamabobs, their consoles look like they're made from the decapitated heads of R2-D2. This is the Star Trek Star Wars crossover that we all deserve. 2 Ferengi ears out of 5. Poindexter G.
I did also say, my girlfriend mentioned when they got to the planet. I can't remember exactly what she said about their clothes, but I said, yeah, that's another thing on Star Trek. For whatever reason, most alien races just really like vests for some reason.
Yeah, they love vests. I mean, the plot again is like these guys are looking for information, right? Chakotay and Paris down there, and everyone's like, give us your shoes. And they have to be convinced to give them their shoes when all they do is replicate the shoes. You know, it's like,
right.
What's the problem? Just giving these people what they want so they can give you the information that you need. It's this weird, like, ill-considered, why would Chakotay care? It's a small point, but it just annoys me.
It's because, and I can't believe you don't know this, Wes, much like you didn't know the Betazoid eye thing, but the secret to faster than light travel is inscribed on the soles of all Federation Starfleet officers' shoes.
Oh.
So if you are going to a non-warp planet and you leave your shoes behind, that's basically like leaving the Terminator arm behind.
Oh.
You know, you're going to change everything.
I get it. I thought you were going to go in a Chakotay, being a Native American, doesn't want anything more taken from him. But they didn't do that instead. This is False Prophets. I sent it to you. It's Poindexter G. Yes.
False Prophets. I remember when Voyager was on the air, a bunch of fans online, yes, we were on the internet back then, remembered from TNG's The Price that there were 2 Ferengi in the Delta Quadrant, and we were all like, Voyager could totally meet up with those guys. They should do that. Maybe we didn't really know what we were asking for here. This isn't terrible, but it falls right into the same pile as most of Deep Space Nine's Ferengi episodes.
Yeah. Unless we forget, DS9's Ferengi episodes are bad. It is one of the worst parts of that series. But Matt Ross says, false prophets. Oh, a little trivia, Clay. So 0, 1, or 2, how many of the actors returned to play the Ferengi?
1.
Yeah, it's just 1.
I don't know which one.
No, I don't know either. So apparently, I didn't even realize this. The second Ferengi in TNG, the TNG episode, didn't even have a line. He was like an uncredited actor. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's only one that says things. And the one that they got is the one that says things. So.
Okay.
Matt Ross says, false prophets. I like the tie into a TNG episode and the fact that there seemed to be an angle to get home. I always wondered, what if the ship sat still and waited a bit if they could make it into the wormhole? It is true. Like, how long can you just sit in the same spot and have the wormhole reappear for you? I liked Ethan Phillips as the grand proxy and the cheesy nature of the pure capitalistic parasitic relationship imputed to the very human-like aliens that like ear jewelry. That said, with the cheesiness does get a bit tiring, from ear jobs to the overemphasizing of words. Wait for Clay's voiceover. None so far. But overall, this was fine, if not a bit boring, as we knew the original airing, they still had a season left. 3 ear necklaces out of 5. Groppler John Zorn is our next comment.
Voyager isn't sci-fi. It's just a show about not getting laid. Tuvok, the faithful spouse, is not getting laid. Janeway, the Victorian holonovel consumer, is not getting laid. Seska extracted Chakotay's DNA, not with her room temperature Cardassian hoo-hoo, but with technobabble.
Room temperature means she's dead.
That's pretty chilly. The Delaney sisters exist in dialogue merely to highlight Tom and Harry's inability to score. Don't even get me started on Kes and Neelix. This is a show so rooted in Puritanism that its characters would rather cockblock a couple of Ferengi than get themselves home. No, sir, neither Voyager nor any of its crew will ever penetrate that wormhole. 2 bright blue testicles out of 5 years to go.
Very good. Yeah, it's there's a lot of pent up frustration.
We're getting into Gene Shalit territory with some of these. I think.
Well, I like that comment because it actually almost makes the episode about something. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
The symbolism in the comment is more than the symbolism of the episode, except it's the English lit thing where I'm like, oh, that's a good point that you pulled out of your ass that actually lines up with everything. So
yeah, that actually would have been a much more interesting episode if it was just the text was just everybody was just really sexually frustrated, and so they took it out of the Ferengi, and then it ended up not getting home because of it.
Yep. Artorius says, false prophets. I guess I will be going against the grain here and saying I actually like this episode. I've always enjoyed watching the Ferengi and their bombastic ridiculousness. I found the episode very silly and lighthearted, and perhaps that is why I enjoyed it. From the moment you see them appear with an Epstein-esque entourage, Epstein-esque entourage to them heading back to the Divine Vault, Salem style, you're reminded of the cartoonishness of them. Not everything has to be mind-bendingly cavalcade of literary highlights. Sometimes you just need mindless entertainment. 2 golden ears out of 5.
I don't know if I'd go that far. That wasn't necessary. I wouldn't say that was Epstein-esque. Those women were far too old.
Yes, they were. They were mature women. That's I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't understand what the reference was. But, yeah. They were real and they were spectacular. Or the inverse of that on the first half, anyway.
Well said.
Those breasts were defying gravity more than Voyager does when it lands on a planet, is the point there. Nick the Rat says, false prophets, humans in the Delta Quadrant, and no one is curious? How the hell did Neelix become such a good Ferengi so fast? Giving away money would mess up their entire economy, and blowing up rare photon torpedoes for a light show. Sheesh. All while the doorway to home is closing. I would have murdered Janeway if I was on that ship. I hope Chakotay takes her shoes. 2 ear grabs out of 5. That's true. The photons are supposed to be limited in supply, and they fired off all 3 of them. I guess they needed to. I would have understood it if she'd gone to the wormhole. She's clearly not
focused. Yeah. She's clearly not focused on the important shit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if she's like, we're going to go through the wormhole, we could fire off all our torpedoes.
Yeah,
I would have bought that. So this is Woodrow to you.
Her face would have been red if they did that.
Mm-hmm.
False prophets. The point of Janeway is to, at times, be a lousy captain, to be uncircumspect and investigate every nebula or distress call. That being said, her choices in this episode were horrendous. Even a rookie captain would know the Ferengi's response to a narrowband subspace carrier a narrowband subspace carrier wave would be a graviton pulse destabilizing the wormhole. When I was a kid, I never forgave Janeway for this episode. 1 star for Cosmic Karen. Yeah, this is definitely one of those episodes. I think I've used this example before, but every now and then in shows, I hate it when they have a character do something that is like, you know that this is not what the character would do.
Yeah.
I always reference the Simpsons episode where Apu is asleep, and so Homer is holding all the scratch tickets up to the light to see which ones are the winner.
Yeah.
And he wants to buy the one that's a $5,000 winner, but he also wants to buy a hot dog, and he only has money for one, so he chooses the hot dog. Like even Homer would know.
Would see the downside of that argument.
But that being said, Janeway makes enough questionable decisions that I don't even know if this is out of character for her, frankly.
Yeah. Well, it's the again, she's kind of similar to Archer, right? I'm sort of forgetting what Archer made so many bad decisions that we were unsure if the show recognized that it was a character trait of him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Janeway's kind of the same way. I feel that the thing that I would say is a positive in Archer there is that he was so consistently wrong that it almost felt like an intentional trait, where Janeway just feels like she is at the whims of whatever has to happen, and she doesn't actually have a belief system about anything. I don't know. It's tough. I'm not impressed with Janeway as a captain.
Yeah, it's a shame because I like her performance. I like Mulgrew, But yeah, I think that I'm starting to come down on that side where it's like the only thing that makes her consistent is the way that she is played.
Yeah.
Like the things she's actually doing really kind of seem, I can't tell if they're on purpose. She's purposely making these weird decisions and that's part of her character, or if it's just not great writing.
Yeah. Yeah. Royo says, False Prophets. The last thing the show needed was a Ferengi episode. What this show needed even less was Janeway violating the Prime Directive to topple the religious rulers of a Bronze Age civilization and contaminate their cultural mythology just because they disagree with their culture, which is a betrayal of the core tenets the Federation stands for. And just because the Ferengi did it first doesn't make stooping to their level when breaking the Prime Directive any more palatable. When the captain of the USS Equinox asks Janeway if she's ever violated the Prime Directive, Janeway doesn't have a leg to stand on. 1 out of 5.
Yep.
And then the final comment is Ria Lavi says, False Prophets, wake me up when we get to Scorpion, Part 1, which is the season finale.
We will sure tell you to get over here when we get to that episode.
Yeah, is there any point I wanted to make about the Prime Directive? I think we talked about it. I don't think that the Prime Directive is strong enough to hold back against what they need to do in this episode. It's just like it's not a good enough case for it where I feel that anything matters. There was one of the very few Star Trek books I ever read. There was a plot in the book that was sort of about this, which is that the Federation stumbles on a planet that the Ferengi have colonized, and they are much more hostile in the book. Like they've literally just enslaved the population, and almost like Cardassians, they're just strip mining everything. They're like taking everything from them. Mm-hmm. That just feels, that's a Prime Directive that you could interfere with, I suppose.
Yeah.
But here it's nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, the decisions made in this episode, it almost feels like Janeway, the character, has become self-aware that she's in a TV show.
Yeah, that's how I feel about a lot of the characters, actually.
Yeah, because it's like it is not the decision made by someone who is desperately trying. They've been there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Or like she says that. She says, we've been out here for 2 years. And like, there's no desperation built into that. And there's no like, I don't know. They've been burned before, so maybe they just didn't get their hopes up. I don't know, but
at least make that a part of the text then.
Right. Yeah. It's so weird to have the core concept of the show so close to being resolved, but that takes such a backseat to the silliness.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I just think the later Trek series don't take themselves particularly serious, unfortunately. All right, that's it. Thanks, patrons, for leaving your thoughts about the episode called, what is it? False Prophets. Patreon.com/The Pensky File. Clay, on our scale of 1 to 5, what are you going to give this one?
I'm probably going to give it a 1.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think it's a failure of an episode. In terms of being entertaining, in terms of talking about what the point of the show is supposed to be, and it's probably a 2 up until the last act, and the last act is like unforgivably stupid.
Yeah. Once Neelix showed up as the Ferengi, I audibly groaned. I was like, this is what we're doing here, I guess. Okay, I'm sure this is going to be great.
I was actually, the only thing interesting about that appearance was that I was genuinely, maybe it seems obvious in hindsight, I was unsure which actor was going to be playing a Ferengi when they came through the door. I was surprised it was Neelix, actually.
Yeah, not me. They seem to be on the same level as far as ridiculous's. So
Neelix is a good example of just the last point about my unserious. Neelix is an unserious character, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Is he the first unserious Star Trek character that they've had? I'm trying to think if there's anybody else. I think he is, right? There would be
like recurring main character.
Recurring main character.
Yeah, I don't know. Riker didn't take much seriously, but I know what you mean. Yeah, I think probably yes.
I don't think there's anyone on TNG. There's no one on TOS, and I don't think DS9. Like Jake is a serious character. He'd be the only example of someone who's not. I think Neelix is the first. Not that way. type character. So
he stays, right? Through the whole show?
Neelix does, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Buckle up. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We're both going to give this one a 1. Just kind of a silly, stupid episode, and the Ferengi don't help. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Patreon.com/The Pensky File if you want to support us, and you get extra stuff like our coverage of The Price, which we were both cheerful and happy about, Clay, when we covered it on the podcast episode. We both have a long discussion about, like, well, it's a pretty pleasant episode. There's some stuff going on. There's some interesting things. There's weird bad things that are at least interesting to consider in the context of what the show was, like the stretching scene and stuff like that with Troy and Crusher. But it's all there on Patreon. Clay, do you have anything you want to say?
That's where they dropped the ball.
Yes.
Is they should have done a callback to that episode and had 2 of those boob ladies standing watching the 2 Ferengi stretch.
That's
like
their dance.
Crusher.
That's the dancing in this world, is just that stretching sequence. That would be good. Those are the kind of callbacks.
The 2 Ferengis, sack to sack, stretching in front of those 2 women.
Do you have anything you want to say? It's February as this
February.
comes out.
Well, if it's February, I hope you enjoyed our coverage of Dario Argento's Tenebrae on our Rotten Horror Picture Show Patreon. I have to imagine it was great because we haven't recorded it yet at this point. But
hopefully it happens.
And I can't tell you what February is because we haven't picked it yet. So
we will get back to the wormhole of our own existence and return to a schedule sometimes near you. That's it. I don't think there's anything else to say at this point. We're done. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you for leaving your comments. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon. We'll be back with the next episode, which is, I think it's called Remembrance. Is that what it's called? Remember. So we'll see you then.